And here we are again. This time we are going to read a story called The Cask of Amontillado, which was written by a man named Edgar Allan Poe. He looked like this. He lived for about 40 years until he died drunk and poor. He led a pretty interesting life. So Edgar Allan Poe was one of the first guys to really make a living writing scary, weird, creepy stories. He's very well known for that, and anything that you might have seen by him before is probably going to be in that vein. He did the poem called The Raven, the Telltale Heart, Lenore, The Mask of the Red Death. These are all really well-known stories. The reason that we're going to read Edgar Allan Poe is, one, it's almost Halloween, but two, there are two things in this story that we really need to talk about, and that is tone and mood. Let's talk about what those two things are. Tone is how an author makes you feel based on the words that he chooses. So it's something that the author does. You choose words that carry a certain tone. You could say, Mr. Spiker trudged his way to the principal's office. And the fact that I use the word trudged, when I really mean that I walked to the principal's office, is to show that I'm not happy about going. Trudged is a slow, deliberate, sad kind of walk. But you could say, Mr. Spiker skipped to the principal's office. You know, I still went to the principal's office, but now I'm skipping. That means I'm really happy to be going to the principal's office, right? You don't trudge when you're happy, and you don't skip when you're sad. That's tone. It's very similar to connotation and denotation, which you may have learned previously. The other thing is going to be mood. Mood is the result of tone. An author takes a tone when he's writing something to make you feel a certain mood. So this story is supposed to have a dark, creepy, suspenseful mood to it. And we're going to talk a little bit about how he chooses words to try and make you feel that specific, dark, creepy mood. I also want to go over a few of the difficult words that are going to be in this story before I read it. Because this story is kind of creepy and weird, I tried to stop myself in as few places as possible to discuss. So let's talk about the vocabulary now, and then I'll just put definitions up on the screen when I hit that word in the story. The first word is impunity. Impunity means to be able to do something without being punished. It's free from punishment. If you can do something, usually something that's usually thought of as a wrong thing to do, and get away with it, then you can do it with impunity. That's what that means. The next word is repose. Repose basically means rest, but usually when you're talking about something lying in repose, you're talking about it resting because it's dead. So that word has a connotation of death, but it also can just mean rest. The third word is aperture, and aperture is just a word that means a hole or an opening. So every window and every door is technically an aperture, because an aperture is just a hole in something. And the last word that we're going to talk about is subside. So when something subsides, it goes away, basically. If you have a headache one day and your headache fades and you feel better, your headache has subsided. When it's raining outside and the rain stops and the sun comes out, the rain has subsided. It usually means something that stops kind of gradually, but basically that's what it means. It means something that has ended. And the last thing that I need to talk to you guys about is one scene in this story where they talk about masons. So we need to talk about what a mason is and isn't, and also what it is. So there is an organization known as the Freemasons. And the Freemasons have been around for a very long time, and historically it's sort of like a secret club for rich, influential men to get together and do whatever it is they do. I mean, we don't really know. That's why they're a secret club or a secret society. And they have secret handshakes and symbols that they use to recognize each other in public. So at one point in this story, the word Mason, as in a member of the Freemasons, a member of the secret club, gets mixed up with the other meaning for Mason, which is a guy that lays bricks. So that's something I need you to know, that a Mason can be a member of a secret society, or it can be a guy that builds things out of bricks for a living. And those two things don't have anything to do with each other.
I put up with Fortunato for years. When he insulted me, however, I decided to fight back. I wouldn't threaten him. Instead, I would punish him with impunity. I wanted to make him suffer, but I did not want to get caught. I smiled at him as usual whenever I met him. He didn't guess that I smiled at the thought of destroying him. Fortunato was a man to respect and fear, but he had a weakness. He was too proud of his knowledge of wines. He thought he knew everything about them. I plotted to use his pride against him. One evening during Carnival, I ran into Fortunato. He wore a clown costume, and bells jingled on his cone-shaped cap. He was drunk. I said, "It's lucky we met. I just bought some wine. It's supposed to be Amontillado. I have my doubts." "Amontillado? To buy such a fine wine during Carnival? Impossible!" "Silly me, I paid the full price. I should have talked to you first, but I couldn't find you, and I was afraid of losing a bargain." "Amontillado?" "I have my doubts." "Amontillado? I want to know the truth." "Amontillado!" "Since you're busy, I'll go to Lucchesi. If anyone knows wine, he does. He'll tell me." "Lucchesi!" Fortunato snorted, laughing loudly to show his low opinion of the man. "He just pretends to know about wine. He doesn't know what he's talking about." "Some think he knows as much as you do about wine." "Let's go to your cellars so I can taste the Amontillado." "No, the cellars are damp. I can see that you already have a bad cold. Besides, you have other plans. Lucchesi—" "I don't have plans. Come," he insisted. "You obviously have a bad cold. The cellars are very damp. Your cold will get much worse. Let's go anyway. This cold is nothing." I pulled on a cloak to keep warm and let him lead me to my palace. As I expected, the servants had all gone to Carnival, so no one was home. Carrying torches, we went down many stairs to the catacombs, a series of cold, damp cellars under my palace. They held the bones of my ancestors, the Montresors. I also used them to store wine. My drunken friend walked unsteadily, as if he might fall down. His bells jingled. "The Amontillado?" he said. "It's farther on," I said. "Look, do you see the white lines like cobwebs on the walls? It is niter, salt deposits left because of the dampness. How long have you had that cough?"
Okay, so we've got some questions that we need you guys to do as we're going through this story. And here's the first question. Number 1, lines 39 through 49 establish a mood of suspense and horror by describing the story's setting. How does Montresor describe the catacombs? And why could these descriptions be considered spooky? Go back and look at those last 10 lines that I just read. Pick out some words that strike you as words that you would associate with creepy or spooky or dark things. And that's going to be picking up on the author's tone. So see if you can do that.
My friend coughed so hard that he could not answer me for several minutes. "It's nothing," he said at last. "Come," I said, "we'll go back. Your health is important. You are rich, respected. You are happy, as was I once. Besides, I can ask Lucchesi—" "I won't die of a cough," he said. "True," I replied, "but you should be careful. Here, this wine will keep you warm." I offered him wine from a bottle that lay in our path. "I drink to the dead that repose here," Fortunato said. "And I drink to your long life," I replied.
All right, so question number 2. Montresor plans to take revenge on Fortunato, but in lines 47 through 62, he pretends to be worried about Fortunato's health, gives him more wine, and drinks to his long life. Why do you think Montresor does this? Also, how do his actions create a sense of suspense? We're told at the beginning of the story that, Montresor wants to destroy Fortunato, so he brings him down into these catacombs. And the whole time he keeps asking him, "You sure you don't want to turn around and go home? You're really sick. That cough is really bad. Here, have some wine. This will make you feel better." And Fortunato's pressing on. How does this create a sense of suspense? There's a contradiction here. If Montresor wants to destroy Fortunato, why does he keep encouraging him to turn around and go home? What do you think? How does that create suspense or tension?
"These tombs go on and on," he said as we continued. "The Montresors were a great family," I answered. "I forget what your family's coat of arms is." "Two symbols represent the Montresors. A human foot crushing a snake. The snake is biting deeply into the heel." "And the motto?" he asked. "Nobody attacks me without being punished," I replied. "Good," he said. We went farther into the catacombs. I paused. "The nitre," I said. "See how much more there is. We're below the river. The air is terribly damp. Drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Let's return before it's too late. Your cough." "No," he said. "Let's go on, but first more wine."
The third question. In lines 71 through 74, Poe creates suspense by having Montresor describe the setting as he and Fortunato go deeper into the catacombs. What is some imagery Poe uses to describe the setting? How does this imagery create a scary or foreboding mood? So let's talk about imagery for just a second. When we talk about imagery in English class, you're talking about any time something that's written down by an author uses descriptions of how something looks, or how something smells, or how it feels, or how it tastes, or how it sounds, so that you can imagine that sensation in your mind. That's imagery. So if I say that somebody screamed, okay, that's a scream. If I say somebody screamed a high-pitched wail that sounded like nails on a chalkboard, you have a better idea what I mean by that scream because I used a little bit of imagery. So go back and look at lines 71 through 74. Pick out where Poe has used some kind of description of some sensory thing, and then write that down because that's going to be your example of imagery.
I broke open another bottle. He drank it all and then, with his hand, made a strange gesture I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. "Aha," he said. "I see you are not a mason." "Oh, yes," I said. "Yes, I am." "You? Impossible. Show me the secret sign," he said. "It is this," I answered, pulling a trowel from my cape. "You're joking," he said, drawing back. "But let's go on." As we continued, our torches barely glowed in the bad air. Finally, we entered a small chamber. Bones lined 3 of its walls. The bones from the 4th wall were on the ground. This bare wall opened into another small room that ended in a wall of solid rock. "The Amontillado is inside," I said. "As for Lucchesi, he's a fool," said Fortunato. He swayed into the dark aperture with me behind him as we entered the room. Even with his torch, he could barely see where it ended. Bumping into the rock wall, he stopped, confused. Quickly, I chained him to the wall. He was too surprised to stop me. I stepped back. "Move your hand along the wall," I said. "You'll feel the niter. It is very damp. Once more, let me beg you to return. No? Then I must leave you." "The Amontillado!" he cried. "True," I replied, "the Amontillado." Among the pile of bones I found building stones and cement. Using my trowel, I began to build a wall in front of the room's opening. The wine's effect on Fortunato was wearing off. His moaning wasn't the cry of a drunken man. Then there was a long silence. I added several more rows to the wall. Then I heard the furious rattling of the chain. It went on for several minutes. I stopped working briefly, listening to it with satisfaction. When the rattling subsided, I continued building the wall. It was now as high as my chest. I shone my torch into the room to see how my work was going. Then the chained man screamed so loudly that I became worried. But feeling the thick walls of the catacomb, I became calm again. I simply screamed back, longer and louder until Fortunato's screams stopped.
Question number 4. In lines 107 to 112, Poe describes the scene with vivid language that uses the 5 senses to create a feeling of horror. What senses does Poe use? Well, in the last question, we just talked about imagery, and how imagery is any time that you're describing something that you would experience with your ears, your eyes, your nose, your mouth, or your skin. Which of those 5 senses is Poe appealing to? What is he describing that you can see or hear or smell or so on in that scene? Okay?
Around midnight, I was almost finished. I was putting the last stone in place in the wall. Then I heard a low laugh that made my hair stand up. It was followed by a sad voice. "Ha ha ha! A very good joke. We'll laugh about it later, over our wine, he he he." "The Amontillado," I said. "He he he, yes, the Amontillado. But isn't it late? Lady Fortunata will be waiting for me. Let's go." "Yes," I said, "let's go." "For the love of God, Montresor!" "Yes," I said, "for the love of God." He didn't answer. I called out, "Fortunato."
Question number 5. Lines 125 through 128 are the end of the story. Does Montresor succeed in taking revenge against Fortunato? Does Fortunato deserve what Montresor did to him? Why or why not? So let's break down what Montresor actually does. And let's break down what Montresor actually tells us. So Montresor tells us that Fortunato is a bad guy. We'll go back to the beginning of the story real quick. What did Fortunato do? Are we told? What was it? And then, knowing what we know there, which isn't very much, to be honest, we find out what Montresor does, and we find out what he does in really explicit detail. He lures Fortunato down, he gets him good and drunk, and then he chains him to a wall, and builds a brick wall in front of that, and then leaves him to die a cold, miserable, excruciating death. Does not sound very pleasant. What could anybody possibly do to deserve that kind of punishment? And do you think Fortunato did that to Montresor? Tell me what you think.
No answer. I heard only the jingling of bells. My heart grew sick because of the dampness. I hurried to complete my work. I finished sealing up the wall. I piled the bones up against it. For half a century, no one has moved them. May he rest in peace.
Okay, so the final question. Question number 6. Can revenge go too far? Do you think it is ever appropriate for somebody to take revenge on somebody else? And if so, what do they need to do to deserve revenge? And if so, how do you know what to do to get back at them? That's really 3 questions rolled into one. But what I really want to hear is what is your opinion on revenge and retribution? Is it okay to try to get back at somebody if they do you wrong? And if so, how do you know what to do? Think about it and write it down. This is one of those no wrong answers questions. It's one of those kids write neat things that I like to read questions. So tell me what you think. Give me your general opinions and methods on revenge, and I will look forward to reading them. And that's really all for this story. I hope you enjoyed what we put together this time. And